Are you tired of creating the same boring projects that get overlooked in your resume or portfolio? In today's competitive job market, hiring managers aren't just looking for functioning websites. They want to see work that grabs their attention, forcing them to stop digging through resumes and start picturing you on their team. In this course, I'll help you do just that by helping you create a site that combines stunning design with the latest advanced frameworks to make your work unforgettable. Welcome to BlockForge, a fully functional blockchain-themed site. In this tutorial, we're not just creating a site, we're building a complete animated experience. You'll start with a captivating homepage that's designed to impress with smooth transitions and eye-catching animations in every section. Next, we'll create a fully functional blog with article pages that are designed to keep visitors coming back. You'll also build a dynamic careers page to highlight job opportunities, complete with animations that bring it to life. Finally, we'll craft a sleek contact page with engaging effects that make connecting easy and memorable. Every page isn't just coded, it's designed to impress. To bring this experience to life, we'll use a powerful tech stack that combines cutting-edge technology with best-in-class performance. You'll learn about Astro, which includes Astro Islands and content collections for easily managing content. We'll use React for building reusable components with best practices. TailwindCSS will allow us to quickly build the site without ever leaving our component code, and framermotion for silky smooth transition effects that bring the site to life. As always, this site will be fully mobile responsive, so it'll look great on every device. Along with this course, I've included the starter code, the image files, the designs, literally everything you need to build this project completely for free. All you need to do is click the link in the description to access your free resources. When you're done with this course, you'll walk away with a project that doesn't just look good on your portfolio, it will also give you real-world experience that companies and hiring managers crave. This one project could be the difference between getting that next job and getting left behind. Now, before we get started, let me give you a complete walkthrough of everything you'll build in this project. As you can see in the hero section, as you scroll down, you'll have these large 3D shapes that move along with the scroll position and animated SVGs that add another level of polish to this section. When we go down to the feature cards section, you'll notice that they animate automatically, but if we hover over any one of these features, you can see that there's almost this light that turns on from this cut corner card that we'll create, as well as the 3D shape that animates along with that hover movement. Scrolling down below that, we have features with these large 3D parallax effects on either side that really add another level of polish to this section. And then down below that, we'll have a blog section that is complete with 2 columns that independently move from each other. And if we hover over those, you'll notice that those light up as well, just like our other cards did. And even in the testimonials, we haven't left anything out because those smoothly animate into the page. And in the call to action section, you still have 3D shapes animating with the mouse scroll. But we're taking this one step further because we're building every single page of this site. If we go up into the navigation, you can see we have blog, careers, and contact. As we head over to the blog, we still have an animated header, and each blog article animates onto the page as we scroll down. If we go to a blog article, you'll see that we still have our animated header, and of course we have lorem ipsum for the article text, but you can read the entire article. Over in the careers page, we have careers that animate onto the page, and if we click one of those careers, we can see it takes us to the contact page where we can fill in our information. This includes a special cut corner input and cut corner text areas, as well as a cut corner button. This is the most impressive site that we've done yet, and I'm going to teach you how to build this whole site from scratch. Maybe you've never heard of Astro.js, so let me briefly cover why we're going to build this project on this framework. Astro is a web framework for content-driven websites, and it powers the world's fastest marketing sites, blogs, and e-commerce websites, including companies like Google, Microsoft, NordVPN, and NBC News. It features best-in-class performance with Astro Islands, and it also has something called content collections, so it's a perfect fit for sites that include blogs, which is what we'll be building. React is what we'll use to power our interface. It lets us build components and then combine them into screens, pages, and apps. For styling, we'll be using Tailwind CSS, a utility-first CSS framework that allows us to rapidly build websites without ever leaving our HTML. And framermotion is a production-ready motion library for React that enables animations, scroll effects, and so much more. Now, as a reminder, this is the third and final part of this video series. If you haven't seen parts 1 or 2, those links will be in the description. Enough talk, let's build. Now that our homepage is done, it's time for us to create our navigation so that we have a way for us to go to our interior pages in an easy manner. So in order to do that, let's go into our source and we'll go into our sections and find the header section, and then we'll create our navigation in here. In order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create another div below our header, and we're only going to show it when the navigation hamburger menu item has been clicked. And in order to create another div in a way that React is going to be happy about, we are going to have to create a React fragment around our entire header section. So I'm just going to create these opening and closing brackets, and that is going to be the React fragment shortcut that we can use in order to wrap our header section. After that, this div will now represent our navigation. We know that we're going to hold it inside of a fixed container, and then we're also going to have an absolutely positioned container inside of that, and then inside of there we're going to want to have a div that centers it, and then we'll have finally the navigation itself along with all of our links, which are going to be represented by A tags. In order for us to create our links in a repeatable manner though, we're going to want to have an array of nav links. So I'm going to come up to the top of my file and say const nav links, and that's going to be an array for all of our nav links. So we're going to have 4 of these objects. Each of these objects is going to contain a title as well as an href, or where we want the link to go. So for the first one, we want that to be home, and that is going to go to /. For the second one, we are going to have that go to the blog, which is going to go to /blog. The third one is going to be for the careers page. So we're going to have it say careers, and it's going to go to /careers. And then the fourth one is going to be our contact page, and that's going to go to contact and be at /contact. Let me rename that to nav links. And then after we've created that array, let's come down and make sure we're mapping over that array inside of our nav tag. So I'm going to say nav links here dot map. And then for each nav link, I'm going to pull out the title and the href, and then I'm going to use that to display my JSX. So let me go ahead and bring my link inside of here, and then I'm going to replace the different attributes with what we're getting from our nav links array. So this is going to be replaced with href, and of course the link itself is going to be replaced with the title. Since it's a map, we need a key to keep React happy. So let me go ahead and create a key here. I'm going to say the key is also equal to the title. Now that we've done that, we can see that our nav links are showing up on the page, but of course they're not showing up where we want them to. So now we need to add some styles to this div that we just created. The first style is going to be a class name that's put on the wrapper div, and that's just going to be our fixed position style. So I'm going to add fixed here. I'm going to say that the size is full. Let's be height 100%, width 100%. It's also going to be top 0 and left 0 to position it to the top left. And we want to make sure that the z-index is properly set on this to be underneath our header, which has a z-index of 40, but over our content. So we'll probably want to leave this with a z-index of 30. And we want to make sure that it has the right background color. So I'm also going to say BG Zinc 900 to ensure that it's going to be black. Now that is going to cover up our content as soon as that's added to the page, but that's fine because we're only going to show this when that navigation is clicked. So right now we're styling it up to be able to see it, but we're going to add in the click handlers to ensure that we only show this when this is clicked. Below that, we're going to create our absolute position div, and this is what is actually going to hold the content of this navigation. So I'm going to create a class name here, and we're going to say absolute and inset to push it 8 pixels away from each of the sides. We're also going to make this rounded medium to give it 6 pixels of border radius, and we're going to say BG Zinc 800 to give it a little bit of a lighter color. When we save that, what you're going to see is we're going to have a box, and that's going to contain our navigation, but right now it's actually going under our header, so we want it to actually go below our header, and in order to do that, we can just add a margin top. So I'm going to say MT24, and that's going to be a margin top that's equal to the height of our header. That's going to push it down. Since our header does have a static height when we created it, this H24 and medium H28, that means since we know that, we can push our navigation down by that amount. And that's what this MT24 is doing. Now that we have that done, it's just time to style up our navigation items and make sure they're positioned correctly. So in this third div, this is going to be my Flux container that I'm going to use to position my navigation. So I'm going to say div class name equals, and this is going to be h full to make sure it's the full height of our div. It is also going to be flexed. We're going to say justify center to ensure that things are justified center, and item center to ensure that they are positioned in the Y direction in the center of the page. I'm also going to flex my nav tag here, so I'm going to say class name equals flex, and this one's going to be flexed in the column direction to ensure that my navigation items align top to bottom. We're also going to say items center here to make sure they're aligned towards the center of the page, and we want to add the correct gap here, so I'm going to say gap 12. And after that, we should be able to style up each nav item themselves. So let me come into my A tags and give those a class name as well. This is where we're going to put our font size in all of those classes. So that's going to be text 4XL to make sure that it is a font size of 36 pixels. We also want it to be font heading to make sure it's the right font family, and font black to make sure it is the right font weight. For each of these nav items, we want to make sure they're the right color as well. So when they're not hovered, we want these to be a text Zinc 500. And then when they are, we want these to be a text Zinc 300. And that should ensure that they are the right color when they're hovered. Of course, we don't want that hover to happen immediately. So we're also going to add a transition onto this, and we're going to add a duration of 300 to ensure that it has the right timing. So it just gives it that nice smooth effect when we hover over it. After that, I'm going to want to create a couple of hexagons for the background of this navigation. In order to do that, we're going to create a couple of divs inside of this absolute position div right here. So I'm going to create 2 divs. Those divs are going to hold my hexagons, and then just to go ahead and put those hexagons on the page and see where they're going to be at, I'm going to go ahead and bring in my hexagon component and put that on the page. So I'm going to say size equals here, and this first one is going to be 700, and I'm going to go ahead and add the self-ending tag to that. And then for the second one, I'm going to add another hexagon, and that hexagon is going to be a size of 1100, and that's going to be the second hexagon on the page. It should be a little bit bigger, and it'll be show on my bigger screens. Now this is pushing down my content right now, and that's just because both of these divs are not absolutely positioned yet, but they're about to be. So let me go ahead and add my absolute position on these. So I'm going to say absolute top 1/2, left full in this case, and then negative translate Y 1/2, and negative translate X 1/2, and I'm also going to want to bring these below my other content, so I'm going to say negative Z10, and we can add a stacking context right here of Z0 to ensure that it comes below my other content. Now we can do the same thing for the second hexagon, so I'm going to just copy and paste the classes that I have here and put them in this second absolute div so that we ensure that it has the right styles as well. And as you can see, that does add a background hexagon to my nav, just gives it a nice little touch. But this navigation is not currently animated, which means we don't have any front end animation going on for this hexagon. So we're going to want to add that in as well by coming over to my index page and ensuring that the header section is client loaded. So I'm going to say client load here, and that's just going to ensure that that hexagon is animating. And now it's animating, so that gives it an even better effect. Coming back into my header, the next thing we want to do is ensure that our navigation hamburger menu actually shows and hides this navigation. And in order to do that, we need to save the state of the navigation itself. So I need something to do that. The tool that I'm going to select for that is going to be use state. So I'm going to create a use state, and I'm going to create an is open variable so that we know whether the navigation is open or not. So I'm going to say is open, and then my setter is going to be set is open, and I'm going to make that equal to use state from React. This is going to have a default value of false, and then I can decide if this navigation shows based on this is open variable. So down here below my ending header tag, I'm going to say is open and that's just going to make sure that my div only shows when it's open. I'm just going to take this ending bracket and parentheses and put it at the bottom of my div. So I'm going to put that right there, and that should ensure that it only shows when it's open. Now, in order to make that actually work, I need to link up my hamburger menu button with my is open state that I just created. So in order for that to happen, we want to say that anytime that this div right here, my wrapper for my hamburger menu is clicked, we want to change our is open to the opposite of what it currently is. So if it's closed, we want it to be open. And if someone clicks this when it's open, we then want it to close again. So I'm going to add an on-click handler here, and that's just going to be a function that changes my current is open. So I'm going to say set is open, and I'm going to take my current value and then make this function return the opposite or not cur, the opposite of my current value. In order to test this, let's go ahead and click on this and see if our navigation shows up. And if we click it again, we should see it close, and that happens perfectly. Of course, we're going to add more polish to this, and that's going to come in the form of the different transitions that we add. And the hamburger menu should also change when we click that is open button. So for our hamburger menu, we can see that right now we have the top one is negative translated in the Y direction, and the bottom one is translated down in the Y direction. When this is clicked, what we want to happen is for the translation to go away and for it to rotate by 45 degrees. So what I'm going to do here is just go ahead and show you exactly what we're going to want to do. We want this negative translate Y1 to go away, and we want this to say rotate 45. For the second one, we want the positive translate Y1 to go away, and we want to say negative rotate 45, and that should create the X that we're looking for here. Of course, we want this to be based on our is open variable that we just created, so we're going to use TW_merge in order to add and take away these other classes that we want to be added to these hamburger menu lines. So I'm going to add my TW_merge function to both of these classes here just by putting my TW_merge function in and my parentheses, and then we can add a comma and then make the classes that we add here based on our is open. So I'm going to say is open here and then a string, and these classes will only be added when is open is true. So for that, we're going to want to put back our negative translate Y, because this is going to be when it's false. So negative translate Y1, and then when it's open, we want to say translate Y0 and then rotate 45, and that should make that rotate properly. And then for our second line, we want to do the opposite of that. So we're going to say is open and add a string here as well, and that's going to be translate Y0 and negative rotate 45. So let me go ahead and back and change my negative rotate 45 to my original translate Y1, and that'll ensure that it's back in working condition. So let's see if that works. I'm going to click on my navigation. It should not only show my navigation, but it should change my hamburger menu over to an X, and when it's closed, it should change it back to a hamburger menu icon. Now that works, but of course we don't have any transition between those two states. We of course want to add that, and I can do that purely with CSS transitions just by saying transition all and duration 500 on both of these hamburger menu lines. So I'm going to copy and paste that over to my second hamburger menu line, and that should add the transition that we need. So let's see if that works. And yes, that is working very well. The last bit of polish that we want to add to this navigation when it opens is to have the navigation not just jolt onto the screen, but have it animate onto the screen. And that's going to be done with framermotion as well. So I'm going to import a component called animate presence. Animate Presence is a special type of component that allows us to set animations both when a component is coming on the screen and when it's going off the screen. So for this entire div, we have a component that is animating on and off the screen because it's not showing up when isOpen is false, and then it's being added to the DOM when isOpen is true. So if we wrap this entire thing in our Animate Presence component, that will allow us to animate it coming on and off the screen, which is exactly what we want to do in this particular case. So what I'm going to do is, instead of a div here, we're going to make this a motion div that allows us to animate this on and off the screen. So let me go ahead and also import my motion div at the top of my component, and then I'm going to come back down and change this over to a motion.div instead of a normal div. And I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom ending div. I'm going to say motion.div there as well. After I've done that, that will allow us to add some additional props to this when this is animating onto the screen. So my initial is going to be before it animates onto the screen. We're going to say the opacity is 0. When it comes onto the screen, that's going to be our animate prop, and we're going to say that the opacity is going to be 1, and then exit is the other prop that I get because I've put this inside of my animate presence. When this is exiting, it's going to go to, once again, an opacity of 0. And we can also set a transition prop to control the speed at which this happens. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say the duration is going to be 0.5, and that should allow it to happen over half a second. So let's see how that looks by animating this on and off the screen. And we can see that now, instead of just jerking onto the screen, it is smoothly animating on and off the screen because of the animate presence component that we added. So that is looking really good. The other thing I want to do, just to add a nice touch here, is animate our navigation items onto the screen as well. And that's going to come from our nav links array, where we have each of these links here. If we change this over to a motion.a instead of a normal link tag, this will allow us to add some similar properties onto here. So we're going to do a similar thing, but in this case, we're going to delay each one coming onto the screen, and we're going to add a little bit of Y change as well. So I'm going to say initial equals, and that's going to be opacity 0 and Y 20 to start it off 20 pixels below where it's going to end up. The animate is going to be opacity 1 and then Y 0 to put it in the original position, and then my transition prop is going to control how this transition happens. So with my transition prop, I can say that the duration is also going to be 0.5. We're going to set the ease to linear in this case, and we're going to set the delay, and that's going to be equal to the index, which we need to grab. So I'm going to add in index here, and we're going to set the delay to 0.25 times the index. So the first one is not going to have a delay. The second one is going to be 0.25. The third one is going to be 0.5 times 2. And then the fourth one is going to be 0.25 times 3, which will make it 0.75. So let's see how that animation looks as well. I'm going to save my component and then see how that animation looks. So let me go ahead and close and open my nav a couple of times. And you can see that that's actually a little bit jerky. And I think that's because we have some additional transitions happening right here. So our transition is not just controlled by our CSS, now it's controlled by both our CSS and our JavaScript on the page. So in order to counteract that, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and wrap this title in a span tag and add some of those styles to our span so that we have a separation of concerns between what we're trying to do with our motion.a and what we're doing with our text itself. So in order to do that, I'm going to just copy and paste the class name here, or cut and paste it onto our span, and that should leave our text looking exactly the same, but allow us to also control it with this motion.a tag. So if I save this again, let's see if this is any better. I'm going to close this out, open up my nav, and we can see, yes, that's much better. We're seeing that delay happening. We're seeing that animate onto the page, and that's just giving it that next level of polish that we want for each of our components on this page. The last thing, it's a very minor thing that's happening right now, but when this navigation is open, I can still scroll the entire page. And that's not really a good thing. We want, when our navigation is open, for the rest of our page to be locked so that we're not getting the entire page being scrolled behind it. In order to do that, what we're going to do is come to the top of our component, and we're going to create a use effect hook to handle this. So I'm going to say use effect here, and this is going to be a function that runs. We're just going to have it run whenever is open changes. It's going to watch that variable, and then it's going to change our body classes. So I'm going to say if is open, we're going to say document.body.style.overflow is equal to hidden. And then we're going to say else document.body.style.overflow is equal to auto. Now this should allow us to essentially set the overflow of the body tag to hidden based on whether this navigation is open. So let's try this. I'm going to open up my navigation and see if I can scroll the page. And indeed I can't, because I added this overflow hidden. And then when this is closed, I should then go back to being able to scroll. And when it's open, should not be able to. And when it's closed, I should be able to as well. So that is working well. I like what's happening there. With that, this should be our entire header component along with our navigation is complete. Let's go ahead and check each of our responsive views for this navigation to ensure that those look good as well and make any adjustments that we need to make. So I'm going to pull out my browser window a little bit, and we're going to look at the tablet view and see if this one looks good as well. I'm going to come to the top of my page, go ahead and open up my navigation, and you can see that this looks pretty good, but we will want to make a couple of changes to the font size, and we also want to ensure that our navigation wrapper that we've created here is also being offset by enough now that we've come to the tablet view of this page. So let's do those couple of things. I'm going to put in my sidebar to give a little bit more room, and then we'll come down and make a couple of adjustments. The first one is going to be for our absolutely positioned div here. We know that it has a margin top of these 96 pixels, but that's going to change at this medium size. So I'm going to say medium MT28, and that should ensure that it gets pushed down enough. The only other thing I want to do here is make sure that our nav links are the right size, and I think those are just going to bump up to the next size. So instead of text 4XL here, we'll say at the medium size, there'll be text 5XL, and that should just make these nav items a little bit bigger. We also want a little bit more gap between our nav items at this size. So instead of gap 12, we're going to set this to a medium size of gap 16, and that will ensure that we have the right gap there. That looks like that should take care of the tablet size or the tablet view. So let's go ahead and close that out and just double check that everything looks good. It seems to. So let's go over to the desktop view and see how this one looks as well. I'm going to pull out my browser window a little bit more to get a better view of this, and then we'll take a look at how this view looks as well. So when I click on my navigation here, we're seeing that things still look pretty good. I think the only difference on this particular size is going to be the font size itself. So we're going to come down to where we just changed our font size before. That's going to be to our span tag, and we're going to say at the large size, this is going to be text 6XL, and that should make it the right font size. I don't think the gap is going to change for this particular size, and I don't think anything else is either. So with that wraps up our navigation. Now that our homepage and our navigation is created, now we can move on to some of the interior pages. The first one we're going to look at is the blog. So if I come over inside of my source directory to my pages directory, I can see that we have our index.astro, which is what we've been working on so far, but we also have this blog folder. And inside of that, we have this parameter slug here, as well as our index.astro. Now, the way that this works is that if we go to /blog, it's going to take this index.astro file, and then if we go to any of our static blog posts, this is going to be a dynamic slug that we can grab from the URL that's going to be /blog/something, and then we can grab that and decide what post we're trying to show for that particular blog post. So in order to look at our blog homepage, we need to be looking at this blog/index file here. And you can see that it's just some commented out code. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my /blog, or just go inside of my navigation and go to blog and see what happens. Now it looks like it's actually pulling something from this slug.astro file that we have here, or this blog post file, because it can't find this layout. This is some default Astro code. So all I'm going to do is go ahead and comment all of that out by just going ahead and selecting all of it and commenting it. And I'm going to do the same thing for the JSX down here. Just go ahead and comment all of that out, hit save again, and hopefully that will put us in a position where it's just showing us our blog page. Now, I'm not sure if it's showing us this page yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and create a div, and I'm just going to put the word blog there and save that and see if it shows us the word blog if I hit refresh. It does, which means that it's finding the correct file, and now we just have to edit this file to look like our blog homepage. Now what I've done, because we have the desktop designs, is I've set the desktop design as a reference image for my blog homepage right here. So you can see that the desktop design is over here, and we have my blog homepage right here. Now we don't want to start from scratch for this page, which means we need to import components that we've already used in order to create this blog homepage. The first thing I'd like to import is my default layout. This is going to include my default styles and everything I need there. So of course, in this blog index, I'm going to import my default layout by saying import default layout, and I go ahead and call that default layout instead of default from my layouts/default. And then I'm just going to go ahead and drop that onto my page here at the top by saying default layout here. And I'm going to go ahead and give it some content by just going ahead and saying div and then giving that the word blog as well. Now that adds my default background styles, but of course there's a lot more on this design that's already created that we can go ahead and bring in. One of those things is our navigation. So we saw in our index.astro that we have this header section that we should be able to import as well. So let me go ahead and import that into my blog by coming to the top and also saying import header section from /section/header, and then I'm going to drop that in before my div of blog. So I'm going to just say header section here and just drop it in the right spot. And I'm also going to say client load as well to ensure that it's loading on the client and it can animate and do all the things we want it to do. So now that I've done those two things, I automatically have my header. I automatically should have my navigation showing, which is working well. And then once we get to the footer, we'll also drop in some of those things as well that we have in the footer that are on this design, but we can't scroll to yet because we're not there yet. Now that we've dropped in those two components, it's really up to us to just go ahead and make sure that we have the right content on this particular page. So what we're going to have is we're going to have a hero section, and that's going to be one div at the top. So this is going to be my hero section, and it's just going to go ahead and add a comment so that we know that we're making sure that this is the hero section. And then below that, we're going to have our blog posts. So I'm just going to add another comment right here, and that's going to say blog posts. And that's just going to ensure that we have the right content on this page. Now for our hero section, it's not actually that complicated. We have an eyebrow here, we have a title, a description, and a cut corner button. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of the same styles that we had from our home page and see if we can't reuse some of those and maybe create some reusable class names that we can drop into our styles so that we can use these again in the future. So let's go ahead and create the content for this particular section, and then we'll look at how we can create some reusable styles for this section as well. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this content statically, and then I'm going to come back and make sure that it's pulling from the actual latest post instead of being static content. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to come over here and make sure that our content is dropped in. So the first one is going to be that p tag. Let me come back over here just so I can read this. So that's going to say latest post, and then we're going to have an h1 for the page that's going to say regulatory challenges facing blockchain. And then for the paragraph underneath, we're going to say understanding the regulatory landscape surrounding blockchain. I'll go ahead and fix that in a second. And what it means for the future of this technology with a period. And let me go back and make sure that all of my words are spelled right. So I think surrounding was messed up. So I'll make sure that that's spelled correctly, but that should be that paragraph. And then below that, we also know that we have a button. So we already know that we have a component for that. I'm going to import that from my cut corner button. So let's see if we can grab that. And then I'm going to drop that directly below my paragraph by saying cut corner button. And that's going to have the text of read more. and that should create my content inside of that section. Now that we have that done, we can see that the content is on the page. It's not correct yet, but that's fine. We're going to go ahead and add some wrapper classes to style up this content. So of course we have the wrapping div, and that should probably actually be a section tag that we add here. So I'm going to say section and end section. And then within that, we want a div with a class name of container, which of course pushes our content away from the edges of the page. And what I'm seeing right here is that it doesn't like a class name because this is actually not JSX at this point. This is actually Astro's own HTML. So in order for us to use classes here, we actually need to say class equals. This is much closer to HTML. But the cool thing about Astro's JSX is that we can still drop in React components into it, like this cut corner button, like this header section, that enable us to use JSX as well. So this is actually very cool. I like what is going on here. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and we're going to see what happens when we try and use some of Astro's own JSX to create this section. So this is our container. We know that it's not going to be quite that wide. So I'm also going to wrap this in another div. That div is going to have a class name of max width 3XL, and then we're going to say MX auto. And I apologize that once again I forgot that this isn't JSX, so I'm going to make sure that this is changed over to a class, or converted over to a class, and that should enable our content to come inside a smaller container, and we'll continue to massage that as we go. For our paragraph, we're going to want some other styles for these, so I'm going to say class equals, and I'm going to say uppercase font extra bold, text center to push it towards the center of the page, and then we're going to say text zinc 500 to make sure it's the right color, and tracking wider to get that letter spacing in there as well. For our H1 on this page, we're going to give it a class as well. So I'm going to say class equals, and we'll say font heading to make sure it's the right font family, font black to make sure it's the right font weight, text 5XL, or actually 7XL at this size, should ensure that it's the right font size. And we're also going to want to say text center to make sure it's at the center of the page. MT4 should offset it from the eyebrow. And that should be the styles that we need. Let me double check over here and see if it's the same width, which it definitely does appear to be, which means we can move on to our paragraph, and we don't have a lot of room for our code. Let me go ahead and put in my sidebar real quick so we can see this a little bit better. And we're going to go ahead and give some classes to this. I'm going to say class equals, and then we can put in our paragraph style. So this is going to be text center, text XL, MT6 for our margin top, text zinc 400 to lighten that color a little bit. And then we also want to make sure that it's wrapped to the right size. So I'm going to say max width XL in this case. That's going to be the max of 576, and MX auto should ensure that it stays towards the center of the page. I think this is actually text 2XL for the font size. Let's double check and see if that's right. That does look correct. And we're also going to want to make sure that there's a little bit of padding around all this as well when we're done. So that's going to push that down. And of course, we're going to add our hexagons as well. For our button, we're going to want to wrap that in a div. So I'm going to say div class equals here. And that div is going to make sure that it's flexed towards the center. So I'm going to say flex justify center. That should take care of that. And then MT10 should take care of the margin for that as well. After we've done that, we need to make sure that our section has the proper padding. So I'm going to come up to our section class and say class equals PY60, and that should ensure that our section has the proper padding. So let's see if that is lined up with our design. It does look like it is, which means we can go ahead and add our hexagons as well. Those are going to come to the center of our section and be aligned to the center of our section, so we can either align those directly inside of our section tag, or we can put it inside of our content. I kind of like them being inside of our section tag, just directly in the center. So I'm going to make this section relative, and then we're going to put our absolutely positioned divs inside of here. So I'm going to say div class equals, and that is going to be absolute left 1/2, top 1/2, negative translate x 1/2, negative translate y 1/2, and that should ensure that this is an absolute position div in the center of our section. And then inside of that, we can just drop in our hexagon. Now, once again, because this is an Astro component, we can directly drop in a React component into it, and it will know what to do and how to render. So I'm going to drop that hexagon in here. So I'm going to say hexagon, and we also want to add a size to this. So that size for the smaller one is going to be 800 pixels, and that should ensure that it is the right size. And then for our larger one, I'm just going to copy and paste what we have here, drop it in, and that is going to be a 1200 pixel hexagon. Now that does appear to look right. The only kind of thing that we're going to need to do is ensure that our hexagons are also animated. And because this is an Astro component, we need to tell these to load on the client. So I can say client load directly on what I know is my animated component and ensure that it loads on the client. So when I do that, then I can see that my hexagon then works and loads on the client. I'm going to add a couple more things in here. We're going to control the animation on these as well. So I'm going to say animation duration is going to be equal to 30 if that's the right prop. It doesn't look like it is. Let me double check my hexagon to see what we need. Oh, it's actually going to be a duration prop. So I'm going to come back here and say duration equals 30. And then for my second one, I'm going to say duration equals something larger like 50. And we're also going to want to reverse this as well. So I'm going to say reverse and make sure that happens correctly. So that is looking really nice right now. Right now I'm happy where this is at, but it looks like we do have some overflow that's happening to the left and right of our component. We definitely can't have that. So for my section, what I'm going to add is I'm going to add an overflow X clip, and that will ensure that any overflow happening on the left and right sides of the page is not actually overflowing the page itself and leading to a scroll problem to the left and right. After we've animated our blog homepage header, we can clean this up just a little bit. We want to make sure that we have our first blog post and then we can get the content from that instead of having this be static content. So I'm going to come in here and make sure I uncomment my import get collection because we actually do want to use that to get our blog content. I'm actually going to bring that below our other components that we've already imported. And I'm also going to go ahead and cut and paste the commented code there and make sure that we can use that to actually get our posts. Now this is using the same posts collection that we used before. So we're awaiting a get collection of blog, and then we're sorting that based on the value of the published date. So that should give us our posts in order. And then of course, our latest post is going to be const latest post. We can set that equal to posts 0. So our first post is going to be that latest post, and that should give us that value in order for us to be able to use that. Let's see if that works by just going ahead and coming inside of our title and then dropping in the title of that post. So I'm going to say latest post here dot data and then dot title, and that should be the title of our latest post. Now, if we've done this correctly, nothing should be changing because of course this is our latest post that we have here. So I didn't see anything change. That is a good sign. Let's also go ahead and change the description the same way by saying latest post dot data dot description, and that should ensure that we have the correct description. And once again, nothing changes. That's a really good thing. Then we just need to make sure that our cut corner button is leading to the right place. So for our cut corner button to lead to the right place, we need to make sure that we have a link around here. So I'm going to say a href equals, that's where we're going to put the href of our post. And then we can just wrap this cut corner button with that a tag. And then we can have a dynamic href here. So the href is actually going to be an interpolated string, which is going to be /blog/ and let's see if we can pull that latest post out of there. So let's say latest post dot slug, and that should be the slug of the post itself. So it should be at /blog/slug, which should lead us to that particular page. Now, even though we haven't finished our blog post slug page yet, let me go ahead back over to this and ensure that we can actually see something here by just going ahead and removing what we have here and just adding a div, and it's going to say blog post, and hopefully that will allow us to go to that particular blog post. So if I click on my read more button, let's see where that goes. Now it says that there's a get static paths function that's required for dynamic routes, and that is happening up here. So we can actually see that we have a get static paths function here. Let's see if we can actually use that in order to go ahead and work with this page. So I'm going to just uncomment this. I'm going to uncomment my get collection because it looks like we also need that because that's used right here. And then it's going to return each of my posts with the parameters of slug and of course the props of the post itself. So let's see if that works. I'm going to remove my collection entry, or actually just leave it there for now, save this again and see if we can see my blog post. So it looks like we can. That's what we needed inside of our individual blog post just to get that link to work. We're not going to work on that quite yet because we still have some work to do with our home page. So let me go back to that blog home and see what else we need to do. And of course, the next thing we need to do after we've added this as dynamic data is to go down and fill in our blog post section or all of our blog posts below our header. Back in our blog index file, let's go ahead and move under our header section. I'm just going to fold that up and move down to our blog posts. We're going to want to change this to a semantic section tag. So I'm going to go ahead and do that by changing that section tag. And then inside of that, we're going to want to start creating the content of this section. Let me go ahead and add a div with a class of container right there. And then inside of that div, we're going to make sure we have a grid. That's going to be div class equals grid and grid calls to make sure we have the right columns. And then we'll say gap 8, and that should ensure that we have the appropriate gap spacing between them. Now we've created a similar grid before on the home page for our latest post. So we need to kind of mimic that same way that we did that. And that was, we just basically created 2 separate grid columns. And then for those grid columns, we went ahead and mapped over our different posts, and then we pulled out the even and odd ones, and of course at the small size we showed all of them. So we can do the same thing here by going ahead and mapping over our posts. So I'm going to say posts.map, and then for each of those posts we have a function that we are going to return some things from, and that's going to create some JSX for us. We know that for each of these we want to add a card. So let's see if we can bring in our card component from there. So let's go ahead and make sure we can fill in the content of that. And then inside of that card, we're going to want to have, of course, our title, our description, all of that as well. Now, in order to see our design a little better, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to add some padding to the bottom of this section. I'm going to come here and say class equals PB and then something like 1,000 pixels in order just for us to be able to scroll down more on our design as I'm using that as the reference image. So if I look at that, what I can see is we have a tag, a title, a description, and of course the footer on each of these cards. So I want to go ahead and add the same thing here. So that's going to be inside of our card. We're going to have a tag component. That tag component we can import, and then for each of our posts we're going to want to bring that in. So we're going to pull out the data, and of course inside that data we're going to have a category. So we can pull out that category, just destructure it like that, and then we can directly drop that category in our tag. So I'm just going to say category here and save it and see if we have that category inside our tag. It does look like we do, which means that we can then add the title. So that title is going to be inside of an H2. We're going to have the title that's going to be in the data as well. So I'm going to destructure the title and make sure we have that. And then we can drop that inside of our H2 like so. And then for the description, we want to do something very similar. So I'm going to create a P tag, destructure the description from our data, and then drop that inside of our P tag. And then we can add the styles for this as well. So that's going to be description there. And as long as that's lined up accurately, that looks like it should be right. So then we can add the styles for each of these posts. For these posts, we're going to add classes here. Now we're adding in these React components, these JSX components here, but everything here is still an Astro component. So I'm going to just use class here. So class equals, and that's going to be font heading to make sure it's the right font family, font black to make sure it's the right font weight, text 3XL to make sure it's the right font size, and then MT4 should put it 16 pixels from the tag. And then for the description, we'll say class equals, and that's going to be text large for the font size, MT6 for the margin, and then text zinc 400 should ensure that it's the right color for that description. Now there's a couple of props that we're going to want to change here because of course we're going to want to change the card color as well as the tag color based on what the category of the post is. So let's see if we can add that as well. So I'm going to say color here, but of course it's going to be based on that utility function that we created before. So in order to use that, we can say get post color from category and then just drop in that category, and that hopefully should set the card color. When I save that, I should see my card colors changing, and indeed I do, which looks like that's linked up correctly, so I'm happy about that. But we also want to set the tag color for that as well. So I'm going to say color equals get post color from category and do the same thing, just drop in that category, and hopefully that should set our tag color equal to that as well. That looks right. The other thing I'm seeing is instead of learn more, we want the card text to be something else. So let's see if we can set that. Let me see what my props are on this card. Looks like we have a button text prop. So I'm gonna go ahead and say button text equals read more. And that should allow us to change that button text as well. The only other thing I'm seeing here is, of course, we're going to want to link each of these cards to their appropriate item. So I'm going to add a link here. So I'm going to say href equals, that href is going to pull in the slug. So I believe the slug is another piece of data that we get here. So I'm going to drop in this as an interpolated string and say /blog/slug. And that should allow us to drop in the right link. And then I'm just going to make sure that our card is wrapped in that A tag. The other thing I want to ensure is that our blog posts are spaced out appropriately. So on this div right here, we'll say class equals flex call. That'll ensure that they're flexed to the column direction. And then gap 12 should put the right amount of gap in between each of our cards. Now this particular column would work really well on the mobile size, but of course on the desktop size, we want these to be more 1, 2, 3, 4 going back and forth. And in order to create that, we need to map over our posts inside of a second column and essentially do a very similar thing. So I'm actually going to copy and paste my first one here to my second column because I know that we can then modify this to make this second column work the way that we want it to. So to do that, let's go ahead and look in our post.map call and see if we can pull out the index and use the index to tell us whether this particular blog post should be shown in the second column. So I'm going to say post index here, and then we can add a class based on that post index. So I'm going to say class on my A tag, and that's going to be a JavaScript attribute that's going to use TW_merge. And then we can say if the post index is an even value, so let's say post index modulo 2, then we can use a ternary statement to say these are the classes that we want to add if it's even, and these are the classes that we want to add if it's odd. So this is basically an even check, this modulo 2, and we can even say equals 0. So that modulo 2 equals 0, that's going to be an even check. So if it's divisible by 2 evenly, then we want to add some classes there. And if it's not, then we know that it is an odd post. Now our odd posts are going to be the ones we show over here. So our even posts are going to be the ones that we want to hide. So I'm going to say hidden on this, and that should ensure that we never show one of those even posts over in this second column. We're going to do the opposite of that for our other columns. Let's scroll up to our other column and then go ahead and add a class on here. So I'm going to say class equals, once again, TW_merge, and once again, post index. Let me make sure I pulled that post index out from our map. So post index right there. And then I can say if post index modulo 2 is equal to 0, then we're going to add something there, or maybe not, depending on if it's even or odd in this particular column. So in this column, for our even ones, we don't want to add anything. For our odd ones, we want to add our hidden here as well. So let's make sure that that is happening right. So we should see 1, 2, 3, 4 based on our latest post. That looks like it's currently correct. So that is the way that we want that to work. Now for our second column, we also want to make sure that that has a little bit of margin on the top of it. And then we're going to come back and add some animations to this section as well. So we want to say that this is MT28. That should add 112 pixels, or actually I think 24 was what we were going for. That should add 96 pixels of padding or margin to the top of that second column just to offset that. But now that we have those in two separate columns, those look really good. Those look like they should scrolling down the page. And of course, we even have our hover effects already working just based on simple CSS, even though these cards are being server rendered right now, which means they're not having any kind of JavaScript that's working with them right now. But of course, we're about to change that because we want to make sure that they animate onto the page. In order to do that, we need to go ahead and import our motion. So I'm going to import motion from framermotion, and let's see if this is a problem to use this. I'm not seeing it causing any issues right up front, and that's because we haven't actually used it yet. So let me go ahead into one of my posts and see what we need to do in order to change this over to a motion component. And I think what we need to do is make this, instead of a link, let's make this a motion.a. And we'll do the same thing with this motion.a here. That'll mean that we'll need to change our class over to a class name, because now we've just changed this into a React component by saying motion.a instead of a. So this becomes a React component, which just means we need to make sure that our class name is here. The other thing we need to do is we actually need to client load this particular component to say, hey, do some things on the client side, load your client side JavaScript. That's perfectly okay. We'll add in that client load prop there and then save that. And then we shouldn't see any changes to the particular component yet, because we need to add on the props that will enable this to show as we scroll down to it. And that's going to be our while in view and viewport props that we'll add in now. So we'll say initial, and then that's going to be opacity 0, Y20, similar to what we did to our nav items in the navigation. Then we'll say while in view, we're going to make that opacity of 1 and Y of 0. So that's going to bring that into the normal position as well as opacity. And then we can also add a viewport prop as well. So viewport is going to control how many times this can happen. So we're going to say once true to make it only happen once. And we can also set the amount of the div that has to be in the viewport in order for this to happen the first time. So we can say amount 0.5, and that will ensure that half of the blog card actually has to be in the viewport before this animation will happen. And then we can also add a transition prop that will just control how quickly and how the transition happens. So we can say transition duration, we'll say 0.5, and we'll also say ease in, and hopefully that should add the proper ease as well. So now we're seeing that happen. Let's scroll down the page for our first blog grid column, and we can see that each of those are easing into the page. That's a really great effect that we can then copy to our second post grid as well to ensure that these other ones are coming onto the page as nicely. So all we do down here is say motion.a. We're going to say the same thing here. So I'm just going to make sure that we have our motion components added. We're going to say client load, and then I'm going to take the attributes that I've already added after I change my class name. So that needs to be class name equals, because it's now a React component. And I'm going to take the attributes that I've added up here and just copy and paste them down here as well. So under client.load, I'm going to paste all of those attributes. And now as we scroll down the page after I refresh, we should see that actually taking place. So I'll refresh, scroll down the page, and we should see as we scroll each of those blog posts animating into view, which is a great animation effect. Now that we have that done, there's a couple more things we need to change about this section to ensure that it looks more like the design. So what you're seeing over in the design is you're seeing this kind of section, some padding on the top, and then you're also seeing this little bit of opacity here so that you're seeing a dark background, but it's not completely hiding the hexagon behind it. So we need to add those styles as well. So I'm going to say PY32 to add 128 pixels of padding top and bottom to this section over here. We also want to say BG Zinc 900 with an opacity of 30. That should add the proper opacity to that section. And then we'll say backdrop blur small to make sure that that's added. And then relative should make sure, hopefully, that it overlaps the section before it, which it already looks like it did. I might not even need that relative class to be on there. So now that that's happening, we are seeing that this hexagon animation is coming down. Let's see if it comes underneath of this section. It looks like it is. That just adds a really nice, almost glass-like effect to the top of this section. I like what that is doing for sure. And as we scroll, we can still see that our animation is taking place. Now that we have completed this section, we can take off this PB1000 because we don't need our padding bottom to be showing there anymore. And we know that below this particular section, we're going to have our call to action and our footer. That's the next things that are coming into this particular part of the page. So let's go ahead and import those. So I'm going to just go ahead and start trying to use them and see if that works. So we first have actually our testimonials. So let me see if we can bring in our testimonials section below that. Make sure that's animated by client load. Below that, we also have our call to action. So let's see if we can say call to action. And we're also going to load that with client load. And then below that, we also want our footer to be here. So I'm going to say footer, and let's see if we can bring that in as well from our sections/footer. So after I save that and go up to the top of my page, we have our header, our navigation. Of course, it starts with our header. We have our hero. We have all of our blog posts. Coming down to the bottom, we have our testimonials, of course, our call to action section, and our footer that we just dropped in directly using the components. Now, as I look at this, what I'm seeing is that I think some of these things need to shift from our normal layout to our default layout. And what I'm saying by that is that some of these components we're always going to want to be on the page. So there's never going to be a time when we don't want our header to load. There's never going to be a time when we don't want our testimonials or our call to action or our footer. So maybe we should move some of those components into our default layout and have those load there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up my sidebar and go to my layout, my default layout. I'm going to drop some of those components into my default layout. So let me come back in here and cut my header section out like so, and then I'm going to come into my default layout and drop it above my slot, and I'm going to go ahead and type header section again just to be able to easily import that. That should import it at the top of the file, which I can see that it did, and that should enable my header section to be in my default layout itself. Now what that's going to do is it's actually going to create two because I haven't yet saved this one. So if I save this one and remove it from here, then I only have one header at the top again. And of course, I'm importing this in my index. So let me go ahead and remove that header section import from my blog index because I'm not using it anymore. The same is true of all these other three. So I'm going to just cut the other three from my footer. I'm going to come into my layout. I'm going to drop them below the slot now because of course they're coming after my content, and I'm going to make sure that they're imported by just going ahead and typing the names of each of them again and hitting enter when I see the right one pop up. So I'm going to say call to action. That's going to import from call to action. My footer is going to import from section/footer. And after I save that again, I should be able to come into my blog index, save this, remove all the imports that are no longer needed like so, and that should still give me the same page, but now I have all of those sections automatically being dropped in. All I need to drop in then are the content of the particular page. Now that's working well. Of course, we need to also do the same thing because we've added these to the layout to our index page. So now we no longer need our header section on our index page. And the same is true of the three testimonials, call to action, and footer at the bottom. We can just remove those and remove the imports for those as well. And then after we do that, we can save it and just go back to our home page and make sure that all that still looks good. So I'm just going to remove those imports, go ahead and remove the space for those imports, come back to our home page by clicking on our navigation and going to home, and just ensuring that we don't have duplicates of any of those items on our home page, which it doesn't look like we do. Everything looks like it's happening as it should. So I'm gonna go back to my blog and ensure that this still looks good as well, which it looks like it does. After we've made that shift, let's go ahead and double check that everything looks good on our mobile views, which I doubt it looks quite right. We'll probably need to change a couple of things here. And indeed, that does appear to be the case. We have our blog posts coming down, and of course, those are fine. What's not great is the text size in our hero section. And I want to just double check that everything else looks good here as well, which most of the other things look good. I just want to ensure that we have the right spacing and font size here. So coming back to my blog index, I'm going to go into that page and come into my hero and look at the font size after I put in the sidebar of my hero text. That's text 7XL. I think on the medium size, we're going to make that text 6XL just to bring that down a little bit. And I believe that the description text font size will still be the same. which it is. So that's definitely a better look for that for sure. The other thing that looks like it shifts a little bit is the spacing in between our cards. We want to give our cards a little bit more room to breathe. So inside of this, I want to come into my section and ensure that my gap isn't 12 anymore. I think my gap is going to be only 8. So I'm going to say medium gap 8. And of course we want to say large gap 12. And actually we want to change this around a little bit. We'll say gap 8 as the default, and then large gap 12 should take care of that. We want to do the same thing in our other flexed column. So we'll say gap 8 and then large gap 12 to ensure that it has the right gap when it gets up to that large size, but has a smaller gap when we're in our smaller size. Now that's all looking good. Let's ensure that everything looks good on mobile as well. It doesn't currently, that's fine. We can make some adjustments there as well. Coming up into my hero, I think one of the things we're going to change is the header text. So we'll say text 5XL. At medium size, it's going to be text 6XL, and of course at large, it's going to be text 7XL. So I'll make that shift and come up into my header to make sure everything is looking good. With that change, it looks like our description is still a little large at this particular size. So I'm going to bring that down as well. I'm going to say text XL, and at the medium size, we'll shift that to text 2XL just to bring that text font size down a little bit. And then for our posts, those we only want to show in one column. So the classes that we're going to add in this particular view are going to change. So at the small size, we actually want the grid to only be one column wide. So we're going to say grid calls 1, and then we'll say medium grid calls 2, and that should bring it down to just showing one column at a time. And then where our first grid we do want to show, our second one we want to be hidden. So I'm going to say hidden and then medium flex for this second one instead of our flexed right there. And actually I can put this towards the front of my string to ensure that we have those in the same spot. And then for our first column, we no longer want to change which post is hidden based on whether it's even or odd. So in this case, we actually want to say block, and then we'll say medium hidden so that it always shows for all of our posts. So let me go ahead and scroll through this and see if we have these showing up correctly now. So that's number 2, number 3, number 4. We should see these all the way down, showing up 8, 9, and 10. So we can see all of our blog posts do show up in this one column now by just making that change. So we can say that they are displayed block by default, but at the medium, if they are an odd post, they are hidden in this first column. So that all looks good. Let me just go through this page one more time and make sure everything looks good. But that should be our blog post page, which was created very easily because we already had a lot of components that we just needed to reuse for this particular page. That looks great, which means we can move on to our actual single article pages. Now that we've taken care of the blog homepage, let's move into an individual blog post. And we can get to one of those just by clicking the Read More button on our blog homepage. That should put us into the blog post page. Let's go to that page. That should be under pages/blog, and then this will be this slug.astro. Now this will be getting the slug from the post props, and we can do that down here in where we say const post equals astro.props. That post is going to actually come in from our get static paths function. So if you look, you can see that for our get static paths, we map over each of the posts and we say that if the slug is equal to the post.slug that we've defined inside of the post itself, then we're passing along the entire post as a collection entry. So I'm going to make sure that this is properly typed. So this is going to be what the props are here. That should help there. And then I'm also going to grab the content itself. This is going to be the content of the blog post when it's rendered. So this is going to be the markdown that we're going to be rendering for the post itself. So let's look at this for a second. Let me go into my content and let's find this particular blog post and see if we can find the different sections of this and understand what's going on here. So this one, if we go back, the title of this is going to be regulatory challenges. So this will be this blog post right here. So let me go ahead and close my sidebar so we can take a look at what is included here. So you can see that we have some data up here. That's what's included in our post.data. We have the slug that's defined here. So that's that regulatory challenges facing blockchain. But then we have the content of the post itself. And that content is what is going to be rendered by our content.render function. So all of this markdown is going to change into HTML when we render that content. So when we go back to our individual post, that's what's going to be this content right here. So let's just test this real quick by once again going into that blog post and then going ahead and dropping in this content component. And let's see what happens when we do that. And as you can see, all of the HTML is included in this content component, which is really good because that allows us to then be able to style all of that HTML. Okay, so now that we've done that, now that we understand how all of that works, I'm going to go ahead and delete that. We might need this type, we might not, so I'm just going to leave it here for now. What I do know we need is our layout. So let's go ahead and bring that in first. So I'm going to import my default layout at the top. So I'm going to come up to the top and say import default layout, and I'm going to rename this to default layout from /layouts/default.astro, and then I can drop that default layout directly into my page, and I'm going to wrap my content inside of that. So I'm going to cut my content and then just paste it inside of my default layout. So that will at least give me the navigation at the top, and of course it'll give me my other sections at the bottom as well, and then I have my post content inside of it. Now what we know is that we need two parts to this. We need a hero section, and then we need the content itself. So let's go ahead and create both of those. I'm going to create the hero section with a semantic section tag. Inside that, I'm going to have a div class name, or class, excuse me, because this is an Astro component that's going to say container. So that'll be a Tailwind CSS class that we're using there. And then if I scroll over, I've changed my reference image over to what my blog post header reference image is. And what I am seeing is very similar to our blog home header. So let's see if we can't create a component out of our blog home header and then just fill in the content itself, because we have the hexagon, we have all of the other things that are going on here are very similar to what we had for our blog home header. So let's see if we just can't reuse some of that code. So coming back into my pages, let's go to my blog index, and let's see, after I put away the sidebar, if we can use any of this header code. So this is this section right here. We have some padding, we have the hexagons being included, and then we have the actual content of the component itself. So let's see if we can't use that by copying and pasting this and actually extracting this into a component. Now, the different thing about this component is that it's going to be an Astro component instead of a normal React component, but I'm still going to drop it into my components folder. This one's just going to look a little bit different. So let's call this interior hero dot Astro. This is going to have the .astro extension, and that's going to allow us to use it as an Astro component. So let's go ahead and paste the code that we have inside of that Astro component, and then we need to import anything that's not imported right here. And of course, we need to take away the content itself. So I'm going to first take away the content. I'm going to replace all of the content that was within my container with a simple slot. And slot is like React children. So slot defines where the children of this component will go when we actually use it. And then the hexagon itself is something we need to import. So I'm going to use my 3 dashes, which is how we define what should be defined in the header, our imports for a component. And I'm going to import hexagon from my hexagon component, and that will allow us to drop this in here as well. So let me save this interior hero and then go ahead and try and use it inside of my individual blog post, and let's see if this works. So I'm going to drop my interior hero component in here. Just going to hit enter, and inside my slot we should be putting the tag and title and all that stuff in here. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit save and see if it allowed me to drop that hero in there. And yes, it did allow me to not only use my hero, but it allowed me to go ahead and have my animated hexagons. Everything that was happening in my hero before is happening in this hero. And then I just need to fill in the actual content. So this is a big help for us to be able to use an Astro component to be able to create this. Now we can fill in this hero with the different components that we are using here. So the first component we know we're going to use is this tag. So I'm going to import that. And then I can actually use these Astro props that we're getting from our get static paths in order to start filling this in. So it should be post.data.category is what we should be filling into this tag. And then of course we want to change the color of the tag as well. So I'm going to say color is equal to get post color from category, and we'll also use post.data.category inside there as well. So I can save that. If I want to destructure these props, I can also do that as well. So inside of this post, I could say data, and then I could also destructure the data to give me the category directly, so that I could just drop in category here, and I could drop in category over here as well inside of my tag, so that I can then use these props. Now what I'm seeing is I can't actually render this if I don't have my post. So first I need to create my post, and then I need to destructure that by saying const data category is equal to post, rather than going ahead and directly destructuring it as soon as I grab that prop. So that allows me to both have my post variable and destructure my post variable right afterwards and use both of those variables directly. So after I've done that, I should be able to see that I have my tag on here. Let me see if it's over here. Yes, it is, but it's not in the center of the page. That's perfectly fine. For now, we can just go ahead and center that up with a div that is displayed flex. So div class equals flex justify center should put that in the center of the page if I wrap that tag, and that does. So then that leaves me with my title. That's going to be an H1 tag. Let me go ahead and pull that out of my data as well. So I'm going to give this a title, or destructure that title, and then I'm going to drop my title in my H1 directly, and then I'm going to add the classes onto that. So class equals font heading to make sure it's the right font family, font black to make sure it's the right font weight, and we also need to be the right font size. So I believe that's going to be text 6XL at the large size. So let me go back and see if this is looking correct. It is. We want it to be text center as well to make sure it's centered on the page, and it doesn't look like it's quite the right size. That's going to be text 7XL at this size. That should make it the right size. I'm not wrapping this in the same container constraints that I had on my other page, so I'm not going to be worried about that, but I am going to be worried about the margin top. And I'm also seeing my hexagon is actually coming on top of my content, so I don't want that to happen. In order to get that to not happen, I'm going to wrap all of this in a div and make sure that this is relative context, or at least reset the z index. So class equals relative hopefully should make sure that it's sitting on top of the animated hexagons rather than below. So I'm going to space this out from the tag by adding an MT4 here, and that should give it 16 pixels of space between the tag and the title. And then I just need to add the description. So I'm going to add my paragraph tag, and I'm going to destructure the description for my post data. So description will come up here, and then I can just drop this directly in the description of the post. Right there, that'll drop it underneath, and then I just need to add classes on here to style it as well. So I'm going to say text center to move it towards the center of the page. I want it to be text 2XL if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it's just text extra large. Let me just double check on that. It looks like it's text extra large. We definitely need to move it down a little bit, so I'm going to say MT8 to move it down by those 32 pixels. We also want it to be a little bit lighter, so I'm going to say text zinc 400 to make sure it's the right color. And then we want to make sure it has some sort of container to constrain the width a little bit. So I'm going to say max width 2XL for this one, and MX auto is just going to push that container towards the center of the page. And that looks like it's correct versus the design that I'm seeing over on the right. There are a couple of other things that I'm going to want to put in here. One of these is an avatar that we want to drop below. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. So I'm going to say div class equals for that avatar. And for that, we want to say a class of size 16. We'll say rounded full to give it that full border radius. We'll say BG zinc 700 to give it that default background color, and then BG cover BG center, so that when we add the background image of the actual avatar, we'll have a way for that to be covered as well. We want to wrap this in a flexed div so that we can push this towards the center of the page. So I'm going to wrap this in my flexed div. That div is going to have a class of flex call, because we're going to align other items with it as well. And then we can say items center, and I believe that should center it on the page. In order to push this down a little bit, we'll say MT8, just like our description, and that should push the avatar down by 32 pixels. Below that, we want the name to be below the avatar. So I'm going to give this another div, and that div is going to say the name of the author. Now we can get the name of the author from the data as well. I believe we have an author variable there, and we can actually destructure this again to get the name of the author, and we'll just destructure the variable name there. So we can just drop this name directly in this div, and that should allow us to see the name of the author, which we do under here. We also have the title of that person. Now this is a little bit different because I think, let me see if title. So yes, we would have a conflicting variable if we just destructured title directly. So we can rename this with a colon and say author title, and that should help us to have another variable name that we can use. So I'm going to take this author title, I'm going to drop it in a div below the name, and I'm just going to say author title like that, and that should put the author title below that name. Now, in order to style these up, we just need to add a couple of classes to these as well. So I'm going to say class equals, and for this flexed container here, we'll put a gap in between the name, the avatar, and the title. That's going to be a gap of 12 pixels. So we'll put that gap 3 there. And then for the name, we'll say font extra bold, text large, and that will make it the right font size and font weight. And then for the title, we'll say class equals text zinc 500. That's just going to make it that light color that we see in the design. Now what I'm seeing is that we actually don't have a gap of 12 pixels in between the avatar, the name, and the title. We actually just have that between the avatar and the name. So I'm going to actually change that gap 3. I'm going to remove that, and I'm actually just going to put an empty 3 on my name. That should put that 12 pixels of margin top there. And then I don't think there's actually any margin between the name and the title. So I'm just going to leave that alone as is and leave it at the text zinc 500. Right now, our blog header is looking very much like the design, which means it's time to come down and talk about what we needed to do with our content in order to get this styled up. Now, as you can see, we're using a content component, which means we don't directly have access to the class names in that content component. And Tailwind CSS is resetting all of our styles. So it's resetting for any H2s and H3s and paragraphs. It's resetting all those styles to these base styles. We need a way to be able to control this typography of our blog content without having direct control, which we don't have direct control. Thankfully, Tailwind gives us a way to do this. So I'm going to open up my sidebar, and I'm actually going to drop this down to the bottom, and then we're going to look at the Tailwind typography plugin because we want to bring this in because this allows us to do exactly that. By adding this prose class, we can control the prose styles of these different HTML tags. So it gives sensible defaults, as you can see, for basic typography, headings, tables, unordered lists, ordered lists, horizontal rules, and more. All we need to do is bring in this Tailwind typography plugin. So let's see how we do that through their documentation. When we go to the GitHub link, we can see that we basically need to install it by installing it with our terminal. So we need to copy this npm install command, bring it into our terminal. We'll need to open up a new terminal window, and this is very small, so I'm going to go ahead and bring my browser way back for a second. And then we're just going to paste this command here. After we've given that a second to install, we should see it inside of our package.json. So let me go inside my package.json and look for my Tailwind CSS / typography. So I do see that that dependency is being brought in there, which means we can now use that in our Tailwind config. So let's go back to the docs and see what we need to do in order to link this up. So it says in order to add it inside of our Tailwind config, we just need to add this require statement. So I'm going to copy and paste that require statement, come into my Tailwind config, scroll down, and go ahead and drop this into my plugins array. And that should enable us to use this prose class that we saw. So I'm going to go ahead and trash this new terminal window, close out my bottom bar, save my Tailwind config, and come back into my Astro page where I can go ahead and start using this prose class. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new section semantic tag. I'm going to wrap my content in that section. I'm also going to have a div with a class of container that will allow me to wrap that in that container as well to make sure that my content is being pushed away from the sides of the screen. I want to close out this browser window and look back at my post content. We can see that the post is now being pushed away from the sides of the screen, but we need to wrap this in another div. That div is where we're going to drop our prose class. So let me give this a class of prose and see what instantly changes when we do that. What we can see is now it's giving it some defaults that enable spacing, enable some titles. You can't really see them because they're dark. So we need to invert this prose class by using prose invert. That should enable it to say, yes, this is on a dark screen, so we need to use the light mode of this text. And then by using other prose classes, we have full control of how different headings and paragraphs and all that show up. So let's go ahead and start using some of that. By using prose large, we can make the text bigger by default, which we want to do. We also want to center this in the container. So I'm going to say MX auto to make sure that this text is centered on the page. We will also say prose zinc to make it the right color. So this is just going to use a light zinc color instead of white. We'll want to say that the headings are going to be the right font. So we'll say prose headings, and then we put a colon and we say what we want to add here. So we'll say font heading. So any of the prose headings are not going to have this font heading helper to make it the right font. We also want them to be the right weight. So we'll say prose headings font black, and that will make those headings the right weight. And then we can set specific values on some of the headings themselves. So I can say prose H2. So any H2 is going to take on the text 3XL class. And actually that's a little bit small. So let me go ahead and change that to 5XL at this size. That looks like it's a little bit better. And then we can actually change the size. We can combine this with some responsive styles in order to change the size of the font at specific screen sizes. So we can say prose H2 text 3XL at the small size, and then change this to large text 5XL. After we've done that, we can also change our prose H3 tag. So our prose H3 can have a class of text 4XL to change all of our H3s to be a little bit bigger as well. For the large size, I think that's pretty much all we're going to put around our content in order to modify the styles of our content. Let me go ahead and change this over to wrap our text. Let me see if we can toggle our word wrap so that we can see all these classes added in here. So you can see that we have prose invert to invert our text, we have large to make the font a little bit larger, MX auto puts it in the center, zinc makes it the right color, and then for our headings we have a couple of classes added on there, and then for specifically for H2 and H3 we also have the font size adjusted there. So the prose classes are very powerful. If we have content where we can't directly control the classes, we can use these prose classes to control the styles of that content, which is exactly what we're doing here, and this is a very helpful tool that Tailwind gives us. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and ensure that we have a couple of other things added to this content. We can see if we look at our design that we once again have that same padding and glassy background blur added to our content. So I think what we need to do is we need to, much like we did for our interior hero, I think we need to have an interior content component as well. So let me go ahead and create that component. I'm going to come here and say new file. It's going to be interior content.astro. This is an Astro component because it's not JSX in this case. It's actually Astro that we're creating this in. And then I'm going to take what we have in our blog index. I'm going to come down here and look at what is our content wrapper. That's going to be this section tag as well as our container. And I think everything else is going to be the content itself. So I'm just going to grab this as our component, come into interior content and paste it in, and then just finish it off with this ending section. For this, we just need to drop a slot right in the middle. That's going to be where our content of our component is going to be dropped, but I don't think we need to do anything else for this component. It's literally just HTML. We don't have to export anything. This is how you create an Astro component that doesn't have any kind of imports or anything like that. So this is a really simple component, but it allows us to maintain these styles and drop them into other pages as well. So I'm going to come back to my blog slug page and wrap our content in this new interior content component that I just created. So I'm going to say interior content as an Astro component. Go ahead and paste this down here below our content, save that, and see if anything changes. As long as it didn't change, we know we've done the right thing. And I don't think it has changed, although we did add our classes. So we now do have that nice glassy blur effect going on for our content, as well as a little bit of padding around our content. So that is really looking good. Now that our blog post is looking good, let's go ahead and see if it looks good on all of our responsive views as well. So as I move over to the tablet view, I see that my text is a little bit large. We can modify that by just saying medium text 6XL. And as soon as we save that, we should see our font size come down a little bit. I don't think we need to change the description size yet. That still looks good, so I'm happy with where that's at. And let's come down to the small size and see if there's anything we need to change here. And it looks like indeed we do. We can go ahead and modify this at the small size too. And I realize I'm not going mobile first when I use that medium class. What I should be doing is saying text 6XL and then changing this at the large size like that. And then I can say text 5XL as my default and then change it to 6XL at the medium. So we should go from mobile size up rather than large down. That just enables it to be a lot easier to make some of these changes. So at that mobile size, as I scroll down, I'm happy with how my blog post looks. It looks like that definitely needed to change, but the blog post itself has some very large text, especially at the mobile size. So let's see if we can change our pros classes around to modify some of those sizes. So we're saying H2 is text 5XL at all sizes. Well, we probably don't want it to be quite that large. So I'm going to make sure that that is happening at the large size, and then we'll start bringing this down. So we'll say pros H2 is going to be text 3XL at the mobile size. Let's see if that looks good. It does. And then we'll say pros H2 at the medium size, it's going to be text 4XL. And then we'll just go ahead and reorder our classes a little bit. So let's put the large modifier after our medium modifier just to make it a little bit easier to read. Hit save again after we hit our space there, and that should help us out. And as I scroll down, I also see that now our H3s are a little bit large, so we want to knock those down as well. So we're going to add some classes for those as well. So I'm going to say pros H3 by default is going to be text 2XL. When we move up to the medium size, we're going to say pros H3 at the medium size is going to be text 3XL. And then when we get to the large size, we're going to add a large modifier to make it text 4XL. So we're just bringing that H3 size down as well so that it fits in with our H2 and it's a little bit smaller, which it should be. Once we've made those changes, I think this blog post is looking great. So let's just look at the mobile view. Let's go to the blog home and actually click into another one of our blog posts and see if that post is looking good as well. So this is a good one. Innovation, the tag color is still changing based on the post category, and you can see that everything is looking good in that blog post as well. So I think our blog posts are done, which means it's time to move on to our careers page. Now that we're done creating our blog post template, it's time for us to move on to the careers page. And so we can go into our navigation and we can click on careers, but we don't have this page defined yet. And that's going to be easy enough to define. All we need to do is go inside of source and pages and then create a new file called careers.astro. Now, whenever we create an Astro file inside of pages, that's going to create a URL with the same slug as the name of the page. So this is actually going to create our careers page. And then if I reload this page, we should see that we no longer get that 404 error. In order to make sure that we do have our careers page linked up correctly though, we can go ahead and add a section tag here and just say careers and see if it does show up on our page. And it does look like it does, which means that it is pulling our content from this careers page. Now that we know that, we can go ahead and start to implement some of our default layout and things like that we've already created. So I'm going to import default from the default layout, and I'm going to rename it default layout. And then I'm going to drop that default layout component onto the page. And inside of that default layout component for now, I'm just going to have a div that says careers. As soon as I save that, I should see that I have my header, I've got my testimonials, my call to action, and my footer all within that default layout, so that's certainly helpful. The next thing we want to do after that is we want to create our hero section. So we already have a component for this as well, and we can go ahead and import that just by trying to use it by saying interior hero, and then as soon as we find that and hit enter, it should go ahead and import that interior hero component for us. And then within that, we want to make sure that we have the correct content. So in the interior hero, we have a paragraph for the eyebrow, and that's going to say join the team. We have an H1 for we are hiring. And then we're going to have another paragraph below that for the description that's going to say we are always looking for talented individuals, passionate about building blockchain products that make a difference. I'm going to add a period there, and then I'm going to remove this div down here because we certainly don't need that anymore. Hit save and see if our page shows the correct content. it looks like it shows the correct content. The next step is going to be styling that content correctly for this hero section. So I'm going to come into my paragraph. Because this is an Astro page that we're working with, not a React page, we need to add a class, not a class name, and then we'll add our Tailwind classes for this eyebrow. So we'll say uppercase to make sure that it is transformed to uppercase. We'll say font extra bold to give it that 800 font weight. We'll say text center to move it towards the center of the page. Text zinc 500 should ensure that it's the right color, and then tracking wider will ensure that it has the right letter spacing. Below that, we have our title for our page. We're going to give this a class as well, and that's going to say font heading to make sure it's the right font family, font black to make sure it's the right font weight, text 7XL to make sure it's the right font size, and then text center, we'll move it towards the center of the page. We'll say MT4 to give it 16 pixels of margin top, and that I think will be it for the desktop styles for that H1. And then for the paragraph, we want to add some styles to that as well. So we're going to say text center to move it towards the center of the page, text 2XL to ensure that it's the right font size. We'll say MT6 to give it 24 pixels of margin to the top. And then we'll also constrain the width of this. We'll say max width XL to give it that max width of 576, and then MX auto will push it towards the center of the page after that has been added. We also want to lighten this just a little bit, or darken it, I should say. So we'll say text zinc 400, and that will darken it up just a little bit. As I compare that to my design, that is looking really good, which means that we can move on to the other responsive views and ensure that things are looking good at those view sizes as well. So at the tablet view size, we can see that the text is a little bit big for that screen size. So I'm going to make this text 6XL and then add a large modifier to my text 7XL, and that should pull that down just enough to make sure that that tablet view still looks good. And then at my mobile view size, it looks like both the title and the description are looking a little bit large. So I'm actually going to reduce my title size by saying text 5XL and adding a medium modifier to my text 6XL class. And then for my font size for my description, I'm going to say text XL and then add a medium modifier to adjust this up to 2XL at my medium tablet screen size as well. So that should ensure that everything looks good in our hero across all screens. Of course, adding this interior hero component ensured that we didn't have to do any of the work of animating our hexagons. We didn't have to do any of the work of placing those. We just had to fill it in with the content that we wanted for this hero. So that's a really nice component to be able to use right there. After the hero on this page, of course, comes the content. So we already have a component that we want to use here. So we can say interior content, and that will import our interior content component. And then we can just go ahead and create a div here and say content to just see that this is showing up on the page. So if I scroll down, I do see that I see my content div showing up here. And if I scroll over here, we can see that we're going to be adding some position cards. Now, in order to be able to see the full design, because I'm using a reference image, I'm just going to go ahead and add a class, and I'm going to give this a value of PB 1000 pixels. And that's just going to ensure that I have some padding bottom in order to allow this page to scroll and for me to see the content over here. So I'm going to pull out my browser window a little bit so we can take a look at this and then look at the content on this page. So we have a card for each of our open positions, and each of those open positions is going to have a tag for whether or not it's remote, as well as whether it's full or part-time if we have that, or contract, I should say. So that's also available to us. And then we also have the color changing based on the category of the position. So I can see that we have full-time, we have part-time, we have contract, and then we have remote or not, and then we have the color itself. So there's a lot going on with colors that we'll want to pay attention to as we're creating the code for these positions. Let me go ahead and pull my browser window back over so I can get a better look at my code. And we'll also want to look at the content that we're working with for this particular page. So inside of content, you can see that there is a positions directory, and this is where the content for these positions is going to be stored. So we can see that we have a title, a description, a publish date, whether or not it's remote, the type, and the category. So there's a lot of data associated to each position, and this is true for all of these positions. So we have all of that data for the product manager and the UX designer. Now the config is where this actually gets linked up to Astro.js. And I'm actually noticing that instead of careers, because we're using positions here, this should probably be called positions. So I'm actually going to go ahead and rename this to positions. And I'm going to do the same thing for our export right here. So we're going to export positions instead of careers. It's just going to make more sense because that's what our folder is called, and that's how Astro is going to link that up. Let's also ensure that we have the right schema for the data that we're going to be using. So we see title, description, category, remote, and type. And in here we see title, description, remote, type, and category. And then there's also this pub date. So if we use that, we'd have to go ahead and update our schema to include that published date. For now, I think we'll just go ahead and let it be sorted by default. So I'm not going to do any kind of sorting on that published date. We're just going to go ahead and let it be what it is. So I don't think we're going to include that in our schema for now. So I'm going to save my config, and I'm going to leave this open just so we can know what data points we have to work with. But I'm going to come back to my careers page, and we want to import the content from this collection. So what I'm going to do up here is I'm going to say const positions, and that's going to be equal to get collection, which is a special function that Astro allows us to use. And then we have to define what the collection name is. In this case, it's positions. And then from that, we also need to await this because this is a promise-based await. We need to await that so that we get the actual content itself from these positions. Now for each of these positions, all I'm going to do is come into my div and I'm going to map over them. So I'm going to say positions.map. And then for each position, all we're going to do is just put some JSX on the page. So I'm going to say div, and then I'm going to say position.data.title. And hopefully we should see all of our position titles over there if this works. So I do see my position titles are there, which means that that connection is working. So that means we can go ahead and start to create our different cards for this section. So what we can do is we can actually destructure all of our position data so that we don't have to use these long JavaScript object strings. We can just go ahead and destructure it right here. So for each of my positions, we're going to have some data. And then inside of the data, we're going to have, of course, a title. We're going to have a type. We're going to have a description. We're going to have a category, and I think that should be everything that we need to get out of the data for each position. Then we can use that inside of our card. So here, I'm going to go ahead and toggle our word wrap, and I'm going to go ahead and close our sidebar to give our code a little bit more room to work with here. And then we're going to go ahead and wrap each of these in a card. So instead of a div, let's go with a card component. And if I hit enter, it should import it at the top of my file, and then I should have a card for each individual position. And then of course, I'm just going to change this to title for now so that we can see the title wrapped in a card. Now that we see that, we know that that exists. So we're just going to go ahead and create the title. That's probably going to be an H2 semantic tag. And inside of that is going to be our title. We're also going to have a couple of tags above the title, and that's going to be based on whether or not the position is remote, and of course the type of the position as well. So I'm going to wrap those both in a div so that we can flex those. And then we're going to say remote. Of course, we need to pull that data out of here as well. So let's say remote here, and then we're going to say remote and then we'll go ahead and show that tag if this position is remote. So I'm going to bring in this tag component, and we're just going to say remote here. Now, if I'm looking at my design, I believe the remote tag is always that fuchsia color. So I think that should be fine. The other thing we're going to want to add beside it is going to be a tag for the position type. So in that case, we're going to just go ahead and add a tag, and that tag is going to have the type inside of it. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save and see if that shows up. That does show up, but we do want these to change color based on the type of the tag, which means we need to add a utility function to go ahead and give us the color based on the type. So going into my sidebar again, I'm going to scroll down to my utils and look at post utils, and we need to export another function that we can use to get color based on the type of the position. So I'm going to put away my sidebar for a second, and we're going to write this. This is going to be export const get color from position type, and that's going to be equal to a function that takes in the type as a string and then of course returns a string. So we're going to switch on the type, And we're going to say for the first case statement, if the position type is full-time, we're going to return lime. The next case is going to be if it's part-time, we're going to return cyan. The third case is going to be contract, in which case we're going to return violet. And the default is going to be return fuchsia. And after we save that, we should see that formatted. And then let's try and use that inside of our careers page as well. So we're going to say tag, and then we're going to add a color prop, and that's going to be equal to get color from position type. And it doesn't look like that wants to automatically import. So let's go ahead and see if we can import it up here. So I'm going to import get color from position type from .. /utils /post utils, and that should allow us to go ahead and use that function, and we'll just go ahead and pass the type into that function and see if it colors our tags correctly. So we can see that full-time is now colored in the lime color, part-time is colored in cyan, and contract is colored in violet. So that looks like it did color those tags correctly. Now below the title, we'll also want to add a paragraph, and that's going to hold our position description. So let's go ahead and put our description in there within a paragraph. And then the only other thing that's sort of content and style related is we're going to want to color the card based on the position category. So this is a little bit different than the type, which is basically whether it's part-time or full-time or contract. This is the category where it could be engineering or product manager or something like that. We want the category to define what color the card is. So we're going to need another utility that gets the color based on that category. So I'm going to export a constant of get color from position category, and this is going to take in a category string and return a string as well. So we're going to switch on that category, and in case it is engineering, we're going to return lime. In the case that it's product, we're going to return cyan. In the case that it's marketing, we're going to return violet. And like the other one, in the default case, we're going to return fuchsia. After we've saved that, we should be able to import that into our careers page as well. So we can go back into my careers page, go up to the top and see if we can import get color from position category. And that should allow us to use that function to color our cards. We're going to say the color here is equal to get color from position category of the category of that particular position as we map over it. So after I save it, we do see that the card color changes as well. And let's verify that the card color is the same as the one we see in the design. So the first one is lime. The second one is a marketing specialist, which looks like it is violet. So that card color is definitely correct, as well as the tag colors. The third one is a product manager, that the card color is cyan. So that looks like it's also correct. And then the fourth one is a fuchsia colored card. So those all look right. Now it's time to add the styles to our card to make them match what we're seeing over in our design. In order to do that, let's go ahead and start with the tag wrapper. I'm going to give this a class because, of course, this is an Astro component. We're going to say that this is flex, items, center, and gap 3 to give it 12 pixels of spacing in between our tags. For our title, we want to make that a lot bigger. So I'm going to say class name, or class, here. That's going to be text 3XL, font black for the right font weight, and then font heading for the right font family. And then MT6 is going to give it the 24 pixels of spacing between our title and our tags. And then for our paragraph, we're going to adjust the styles for that as well. That's going to be class equals text XL, text zinc 400 for the right text color, and then MT4 for the right margin top, and that should adjust those as well. Now the only thing I think we're missing is the spacing in between each of our cards. So of course we need that to happen. That can be this div right here. We can actually use this to go ahead and take off our padding bottom and then say flex call. That should ensure that we can use this to flex our cards. And then we'll say gap 12 to add 48 pixels of spacing in between all of our cards. After we've done that, I'm only seeing one more thing as I look at the design versus what we have over here on the left, is that instead of apply now, we're saying learn more. We haven't added the button text onto the card component itself. So let's change this button text for each of these to say apply now. And we also want to make sure that it goes to the right page. So this is actually going to go to the contact page. It's not going to directly have any kind of application form on this page. So we're going to go ahead and create a link for each of these. That href is going to be the same for all of them. It's just going to be contact, and then we're going to wrap this card in that ending link tag. So as I hover over this, it should light up. And of course, if I click on this, it should take me to the non-existent contact page, which is exactly what it does. Coming back here, let me go ahead and once again look at my design versus what I'm seeing on my screen. It looks like it's exactly the same. So my design is looking just like my content on my page is, all the way down to our 4 different positions. Now that that's all done, the only other thing that we want to do here is ensure that our positions animate onto the page, because right now they're static. So if I refresh this page right here and come down to my positions, what we're going to see is the positions are just static. So it's just a static list. We want these to animate and add some life to this page. So we're going to do that by making sure that we wrap each of these in a motion component. Now the best place to do that is if I just go ahead and import motion from framermotion, and then I change this link over to a motion.link. So I'm going to say motion.a, and I'm going to end this with an ending motion.a. And after I save that, it shouldn't change anything yet. Of course, we need to add some initials and viewports and transition props to this in order to get this to work. So the initial is going to be what it is initially before it transitions in. So this is going to say opacity 0. And then similar to our other component, we're also going to say Y20 to give it a little bit of movement in the Y direction until it animates in. The other side of this is going to be while in view is the other prop we're going to add here. And we're going to say if it's in view, the opacity is going to animate to 1 and the Y value is going to animate to 0. So it's going to come up. Now, the reason we're seeing this as blank now that we've saved this, is because this is actually server rendering and it's rendering it in its initial state, but it's not animating onto the page because we haven't client loaded this motion link component. So in order to client load this, all we need to do is say client load in order to get this to work. After that, let's go ahead and refresh this and see what this animation looks like right now. So you can see that the animation is really quick and it's actually hardly noticeable because the card is animating into view as soon as we scroll to it instead of delaying for a little bit. So we need to add a different viewport prop to control that. So I'm going to say viewport, and that is going to say once true to only have it happen once, but then also the amount is going to control the amount of the card that needs to be on the screen in order for the animation to happen. So if we say 0.5, that's going to mean that half of the card has to be on the screen in order for the animation to happen. So we can see that that makes it a little bit more obvious, but then we want to slow down this transition as well. So I'm going to use the transition prop to do that. Just say transition equals, and then we're going to say duration. That's going to be 0.5 as well for half a second. And then ease is going to be ease in, and that should help that transition be a little bit slower. So let's go up to the top of our page, refresh again, and see what this animation now looks like. So we get this nice slow animation in. I really like how that looks. That definitely adds a little bit of flair to this motion link. That should be all that we need to do for our careers page, but of course let's verify that this content looks good in every single responsive view. So I'm going to go down to my tablet view. I think that is still looking great. And then even on my mobile view, I think there aren't any changes that we need to make in order for this content to look good. So everything looks good across all the responsive views, which means our careers page is done. It's time to move on to our contact page. Now that we're done with our careers page, we're on to the contact page. Now the contact page header looks very similar to our careers page header, which means we could copy and paste at least the hero content over to our contact page header. Now we don't even have a contact page yet, so we do need to create one of those. I'm going to do that by just going ahead and creating a contact.astro file inside of our pages directory. And then inside of that contact page, I'm just going to go over to careers and just go ahead and copy and paste everything from interior hero up through default layout. And then we can just paste it inside of our contact page. Now we're not going to have those components imported here yet, but that's fine. If we just go ahead and add our triple dashes, we can import default layout from layouts/default. And of course, we can also import our interior hero from our interior hero component. And then we just need to change the text content. So I'm going to enable word wrap in my component, and I'm going to put my sidebar in for a second just so we can see the content a little better, and then we can see what content we need to change. So we need to change let's talk inside our content. We also need to change the title to contact us. And then for the description, we need to say we're here to help and answer any questions you may have. Reach out to us to learn more about our services, get support, or to apply for positions. And after we save that, let's scroll over and see if our content is the same. Let me go ahead and actually go to the contact page. So let me go into my navigation and go to contact, and then we can see if our content is the same. So I'm seeing let's talk, contact us, and then I'm seeing the same description. So all of that actually looks right from the get-go, which is a really nice time-saving technique for sure. Below that, I'm not sure exactly what we have yet. So let's go ahead and do what we've done for our other pages and go ahead and add our interior content component, and we're going to go ahead and add a div with a class of PB 1000 pixels just to be able to see what's in our design that we've lined up beside our actual page. So as I scroll down here, I'm seeing that there is a form and it has a name, email, a message, and of course a send message. And each of these form fields actually has a cut corner button as well. So we'll go over how to create that inside of this interior content section. In this section, I'm going to come inside of my div and make sure that we add this H2 here. This H2 is going to say, what can we help you with? And I want to go ahead and create my content before I come back and add my styles. So we're going to create that. And then we're going to add a form tag. Inside of that form, we're going to have our labels and inputs. So we're going to have a label that's going to say name. And then we're going to have an input with a type of text that's going to have a name of name and an ID of name. And then below that, we're going to have a label that's going to say email and an input with a type of email that's going to have a name of email, an ID of email. And below that, we'll have a label for our text area that's going to have a label of message. And then we're going to have a text area that is going to have a name of message and an ID of message. And then below all of that, we're going to have our button, which we're going to say has a type of submit. And actually, I realize that we just need to go ahead and use our cut corner button here. So I'm not going to create a separate button for that. And we're going to say send message inside of that cut corner button. So let's see what our content looks like now that we've included all of that. We can see that, of course, nothing is styled up, but we do have a name input, an email input, a message input, and of course our send message button that we can style up. Now to create our styles, this is going to be interesting because we have a couple of inputs that still have that same cut corner look to them. So we'll need to work with those, but everything else shouldn't be too difficult. So let's see what we can do to style this component up. We're going to start with our H2. We're going to give this a class, and we're going to say font heading to give it the right font family, font black, and text 3XL should give it the right font size. Below that, we are going to have our form. Our form is going to be styled flexed call. So we're going to say class equals flex call to style things in the column direction. And then we'll say gap 4 to put a gap of 16 pixels between our different items. And then MT8 should put 32 pixels of margin top on that form. Now that I'm looking at my gap 4, I'm seeing that essentially what we want to split is not each label and input. We would like to split the combinations themselves. So I'm actually going to take that gap off and then rely on my different classes within my form to create my gap. So for my second label, I'm going to say class equals, and then I'm just going to say MT4, and that should do the same thing as gap 4 would have otherwise. And then same thing for message. Let's say class equals MT4, and that should ensure that we have that there. And then for cut corner button, hopefully I have the ability to add a class name here, but I'm going to say MT4 and see if it adds that margin top of 16 pixels, and it looks like it does. So I'm glad I added in that class name capability whenever I created this cut corner button. The other thing we want to do is make sure that all of our content has a max width so that it's constrained. So I'm going to come up here to my wrapping div, and I'm just going to give this a class name of max width XL. and then MX Auto should push it towards the center of the page. And that will ensure that all of my content has that max width container. For my labels, this isn't a styling thing, but more of an accessibility thing. I want to make sure we have a for prop to say which input each of these labels is actually for. And this is going to be the ID that we're going to be connecting it with. So this is going to be for the name input. This label down here is going to be for the email input. And this label right here is going to be for the message input, is how we're going to connect those together. Now for each of my inputs, we're going to have to do some interesting gymnastics here. So let's try it with the first input and see what we can do with our class names themselves. So we're going to say class equals here, and then we're going to say BG transparent, because we don't want the BG to be white or the background to be white. We want these to have a set height as well. So I'm going to say H12, and that's going to set them to a 48 pixel height. But other than those couple of styles, most of what we're going to have to do for our input is going to be related to the div that we wrap around our input, because those divs are what we're going to be able to use to give some relative and absolute positioning to the different things we need to bring in, like we did for our cut corner button. So if we go back and review the way that we did our cut corner button, let's look at that real quick to see if we can glean anything from this button itself to see if there's a way that we can see how we did this. So for the button, we have, of course, a background, which we're not going to do for this. We have some padding left and right, of course, top and bottom, our font, our uppercase, our font heading, any of that. That's not related to our border. What is this absolute positioned element here. This absolute positioned element is set to the height and width of the button itself. We're outlining this with an outline of 2 pixels. We have a negative outline offset of 2 pixels, and then we're setting the color as well as the mask image that cuts off one corner of this outline. So let's see if we can do the same thing with our div right here. So we're going to say class equals relative, and then inside of that, we're going to say div class equals absolute, and this is going to be essentially the border for our input. So we're going to say inset 0, let's say outline 2, and then negative outline offset 2, and then we're going to say outline fuchsia 500, and that should make sure that it is the right color. At least when it is selected, that's going to be the right color. And then in order for us to cut one side of the input off, we're going to use that same mask image technique. So I'm going to say mask image linear gradient, and that's going to be 225 degrees, and it's going to go from transparent to black, or excuse me, transparent at 10 pixels to black at 10 pixels. And that's going to be the entirety of the mask image. So as soon as we save that, we can see that that corner is now cut off from our border. Now to fill that in, what we need to do is we need to use our SVG similar to how we have it in our cut corner button. So I'm going to grab our cut corner button SVG and see if we can just drop this same SVG into our input div to go ahead and use it as well. So I'm going to change this to class, because of course this is HTML that we're working with now. And then this will also be stroke width, because this is HTML that we're working with. And you can see that that essentially does the same exact thing. So it's going ahead and putting that SVG in the right spot. It's the right size. So I actually like what we've done there, because we can just kind of grab that and use that. So let's see what's happening here. We have absolute, top 0, right 0, and then text fuchsia 500 will set the color for us. Now the only difference in this is going to be that we need a way to say that when the input is focused, it's a different color than when it's not focused. So when it's not focused, it's going to have an outline color of zinc 700, but when it is focused, it's going to have this outline color of this fuchsia 500. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to make sure that we can incorporate into this input. So in order to do that, what we can do is we can take our wrapping div and we can add a group class to it. Now this group is special for Tailwind because it allows us to style things based on what's happening with the group. So for that, what we can say is that this outline fuchsia 500 can change based on our group class. So let's say that we have group focus within. So when it's focused, we can say outline fuchsia 500, but when it's not, we can just say outline zinc 700, and that will ensure that our color is the correct color. So when we focus within this into our input, we should get it to change to our outline fuchsia 500. Now, the only problem with what we're doing right now is that these absolutely positioned elements are not falling below our input. So what we're actually clicking is not the input itself, it's now the absolutely positioned elements themselves. So I'm going to say Z0 to reset this Z index, and then I'm going to give this absolutely positioned element a negative Z10 that will pull it below our input, and the same thing is going to be true of this one. So this absolutely positioned SVG, we're going to say negative Z10 to make sure that that's also pulled below the input. So now that when we focus the input, we're seeing that our outline border does change color, and then when we unfocus it, we see that it changes color back, and that's of course exactly what we want. So we'll do the same thing with our SVG here. So we'll say group focus within, we're going to change it to text fuchsia 500, but when it's not, it's going to be text zinc 700, and that will ensure that it is the right color both when it's focused and when it's not. Of course, our input is going to need to fill this entire area, so we're going to say block here to ensure that it's display block. Hopefully that'll give it the right width. It doesn't look like it does. We'll say width full to ensure that it gets the right width. And when I focus on that now, I can see that it's the right width. We need to go ahead and take away our outline here. So we'll say outline none. Hopefully that will do what we need it to for our input. And that does. The only other style we want to add here is we want to make sure that our text is spaced away from the borders of our outline. So I'm going to say px4, that should give us about 16 pixels of space in between the border of that input and when we're typing in our input. So that's exactly what we want to see there. Now that this input is looking good, we have a couple of options. Number one, we could just copy and paste everything that we've done from the relative div on down and go ahead and paste it into our other input. But what I like to do is keep everything clean. And I think the way to keep this clean is to create a component for this input. So let's see how we can do that with another Astro component. So I'm actually going to create a file inside of my components directory, and I'm going to call this input.astro, and that will allow us to create an Astro component. Now, an Astro component, as we've seen, is a little bit different than a React component in that it is written in essentially HTML, but it is still able to take props. So let's see how we'll do that by going ahead and copying and pasting our input into our input.astro component. And then let's take a better look at this. I'm going to go ahead and toggle the word wrap on so that we can see all of the classes here. So let's see what's in this component right now and what we want people to be able to pass in as props. So the thing that we definitely want to keep are all of the relative groupings, as well as the absolute positioned border, the SVG. That's all important. The thing that we definitely want to be able to change are the things like the name on the input, the ID on the input. Those will be important for not only for accessibility, but also for anytime we want to create a new input, we'll always want to be able to set those. So what we can do is come up to the top of our component and go ahead and create our 3 dashes. And here's where we can actually accept props, similar to how we can accept props in a React component. So I can create a constant here, and I can say my props is equal to astro.props. Astro.props is something that we can pass to any component, so we can pass any attributes there, and they're going to come out in this variable, and then we can use that variable to go ahead and set some attributes of our input right down here. So what I'd like to be able to do is accept a name prop and also an ID prop, and that will allow us to accept those 2 props in this component, and then I can just directly pass those to my input. So I can say name equals whatever my name prop is, my ID is going to equal whatever my ID prop is, and that should allow us to accept those 2 as props. And then as soon as I save that, that should create our input Astro component. So coming back to our page, let's see if we can go ahead and use that component by replacing our code with our new input component. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit the delete key and then start using my input component. Let's see if we can find it. It doesn't look like it does right offhand, so I'm going to import it. So I'm going to import input from .component/input.astro, and then I'm going to come down here and use my new input component. I'm going to say type equals, and what I just realized when I'm passing in these props is we also do want to accept a type, because our type is going to change in this email component as well. So I'm going to come back to my input. I'm going to say my type is going to be another accepted prop, and I'm going to go ahead and allow the type to be directly passed through like this. So type equals type, and that will allow us to also accept a type prop. So my type on this one is going to be text. My name on this one is going to be name. My ID is going to be name, and that is going to create my input component in a much more simple manner than all of the HTML that I had before. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit save, and let's see if anything changes. Nothing should change over here because we've simply refactored our code to use this input component. But the nice thing about that is that now we can use that same input component down here. So instead of an HTML input, we can use this new input component, and we can pass it the props of type, name, and ID, because of course we accept those. And then as soon as we hit save, we should see that this does allow this input to show up the way that this one does. So they're styled exactly the same. You get all of the additional styles and absolutely position elements essentially for free in this second input when we created this component. Now, in order for us to create a text area is a little bit different than an input. So we'd probably have to create another component in order for us to create this text area here. So let me go to my input, and I'm just going to go ahead and select all of it and copy it, open up my sidebar, go ahead and create another component, and we're going to call this text area.astro, and that's also going to allow us to create another component. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in, but I'm going to change this around. So I want this one to not have an input. I want this to have a text area down here. So I'm going to say text area right here. This is going to be a little bit different because I don't accept a type prop in this case. I'm going to scroll up top and make sure that we don't accept that type prop. We are going to accept a name, and ID is fine. And of course, we don't want this to be height 12 either. We don't want this to be height of 48 pixels, but we do want the background to be transparent. Let's see, we don't want this to be outlined, so that's still fine. The width full is probably not going to matter, so I'm going to go ahead and take that off and go ahead and save that again. And then PX4, we might change the padding on this as well, but we'll see after we use this how this works out. So let me go ahead back over to my contact page, and then I can replace this text area with our new text area component after I import it at the top. So I'm going to import text area from /components/text area.astro, and then I can directly use that text area right here above this one. So I'm just going to go ahead and use it. So name equals message, ID equals message. And I'm going to go ahead and make that a self-closing component. I'm going to comment this one out, and let's just see if this is able to show up correctly. So it looks like that width full did matter because I am seeing my text area handle show up all the way over here on the left. So let's see if we can go ahead and manage that by saying width full on our text area component. That does look like it certainly helps. And then the other thing, because I'm seeing some additional space down here on the bottom as well, is we'll want to go ahead and make this a flexed component. So I'm going to go ahead and add the class of flex here at the top, and that should allow that handle to be in the very bottom of my text area component there. Now there's probably a couple more stylistic changes we'll want to make after we have this inside of this outline. And what I'm seeing is, although the inputs have a good spacing between the top and where you start typing, that's not necessarily true by default for the text area. So let's go ahead and make a couple of updates here to the classes for this text area so we can make sure that that is true. So I'm going to add a PY3 class that should add 12 pixels of spacing on the top and bottom of my text area. That definitely adds a nice little space from the top. And then I also want to make sure that this is a minimum height. So I'm going to say min h32. That's going to add a minimum height of about 128 pixels to go ahead and allow someone some space to type within this text area. The only other thing that I'm seeing that I would like to be able to do is to be able to pass in a top level class to this component. So I'm actually going to also extract a class prop, but I can't call it class because that's a reserved word within JavaScript. So I actually have to rename this as class name or something similar so that we can actually use this as a variable instead of this reserved word. And then I can actually use TW_merge because I can still use JavaScript in here. So I can import my TW_merge function from Tailwind merge, and then I can use that up here for my class. I can say TW_merge on this, go ahead and add my parentheses, my brackets, and then pass in the class name after that. So that's going to allow us to add a class name on here. And then if we override any of these previous classes, that will be fine because the TWMerge function will handle that. So I'm going to save that. I also want to do the same thing on my input. So I'm going to go back to my input component here at the top and do the same exact thing. I'm going to import TWMerge from Tailwind Merge. Go ahead and add this to the top. So TWMerge right here. Go ahead and add my parentheses, take in my class name prop, so class, and we'll rename this to class name, and then we'll go ahead and allow someone to drop that class name right in there at the top. This allows us in the future to put margin and things like that onto our inputs, which is something we'd definitely like to be able to do, because in this case, I would like to say class equals and then say MT1. That would just add a little bit of spacing in between my label and my input. And the same is true for these other ones here as well. So it's say class equals MT1 on that one. And then for my text here, I'm going to say class equals MT1 on that one as well. So that just gives me the ability to put a class on this because I've accepted that as a prop. Now I can go ahead and remove my commented out text area because I don't need that anymore. I was just using that for reference. And now we have a form that should allow us to submit it. Now that we're done building out our form, let's talk about how we want to hook up our form so that we can actually receive submissions from this form. And I think what we're going to do, because we're going to eventually be deploying this site to Netlify, we'd like to use their form integration for this contact form. So I'm going to bring up my browser and we're going to look at how we can create this integration. So Netlify Forms is a free way to manage form submissions. It receives submissions for you automatically and can send you email notifications and Slack notifications, and it can be from any of your HTML forms as long as we put in this Netlify attribute, and we can also put in a name if we want to identify this. So let's learn a little bit more about this in the docs by going to this link, and we can see how this is set up. So it's automatically detected. It is important to point out that once we turn this on, starting with our next site deploy, Netlify will automatically scan our deploys. And if we've previously used Netlify Forms, we can re-enable it, or we can disable this automatic form detection, but we're definitely going to be turning this on. If we have an HTML form, we can either add the Netlify attribute, or we can say data Netlify equals true on our form, and that will enable us to, as you can see this in this example, it will enable the form to be detected by Netlify, and then Netlify will handle the form automatically. So this is exactly what we want to do for this form. So let's go ahead and integrate that as well. So for this form over here, I'm just going to go ahead and leave my docs up, but I'm going to make this a little bit smaller of a window so we can keep an eye on that. And then I'm going to come over into my form and say name equals contact, and we can also go ahead and give it the method of post. That's fine. And we want to say data Netlify equals true, and that should enable that automatic form detection. After we've done that, we're not going to see anything in our actual browser. Like if we submitted this form right now, it would just most likely go back right back to the contact page. In fact, we can go ahead and try that out. If we just say name of Josh, and we'll say email, why don't we say ft@frontendtribe.com, and then hi there as the message. If we send this here, it's just going to go right back to this contact page. It's just going to post it right back to the same page. Now, when Netlify comes in and we host our site there, it's going to take that post request and handle that for us and give the user a success message. So that's what's going to happen, but that certainly doesn't happen right now as we're locally serving this site. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and take a look through our responsive views to make sure that our contact page looks good on every single view. It looks like it does. The only thing I'm seeing is we definitely want to remove this padding bottom rule here. So I'm just going to do that and save that and make sure that as we scroll down on these pages, we can see our testimonials and contact section. So all of that is looking good. This means that we are done with this entire site. We have built a home page. If I'm going back here, so let me pull out my browser and we can just look through this real quick. Built a home page that we can go to, and we can see that we have, several sections on this home page. All of those are completely interactive. I'm going to remove my reference image real quick. All the way down to the bottom, we have a blog home that we can go to, and we can see all of our individual blog posts. We can click on any one of those blog posts and see that individual blog post. We can also go to the careers page and see the positions that are currently open, and we can go to the contact page and submit a contact message. So this entire site has been built from the ground up using the Astro framework. Now, let's talk about how do we deploy to the Netlify platform. Now that we're ready to deploy, let's go ahead and close out our files and talk about the process of actually creating this deployment. So I'm going to open up my sidebar, close down my source folder, and open up my bottom panel so that we can see what we need to do. This node process here is my dev server, so I'm going to go ahead and kill that off because we don't need the dev server at this point. What we need to do now is actually build the site. And this is going to build the site as a static site, which means it doesn't need a server to run. It's going to be rendered at build time, and then we can just drop it as files into our hosting. So I'm going to say npx astro build, and that should allow us to build our site. Let me go ahead and pull this terminal up a little bit so we can see what's going on here. Now this, if I scroll back up, it's using Vite as the builder, and it's building to this dist folder right here. And in fact, it's building all of our routes, including our blog index, all of our blog pages, careers, contact, and of course, our main index page. And if we look at the dist directory that was just created, you can see that we have this _astro directory here, but we also have our index file, we have our contact index, careers index, blog with each of our blog files. So all of those pages have been created as static HTML files, which is perfect for hosting. After we have that dist folder created, let's go ahead and head over into Netlify and see how we can get set up over there. After we have our dist folder created, let's go ahead and drag that onto our desktop and then open up netlify.com. Now, if you don't have an account on Netlify, you can sign up completely for free by hitting this sign up button. I already have an account, so I'm going to go to the login and I'm going to log in with my email address. After you're logged in, you should come to a screen where you can see your sites, and we can add a site to Netlify in a number of ways. We can import an existing project from GitHub, we can start from a template, or we can deploy manually. Since we have a folder that we can just drag and drop in, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and drag and drop this right into our manual upload and allow it to upload. After we've done that, we should be able to come down to our forms and we should enable form detection. This is going to be important. Otherwise, we won't be able to get any notifications or form handling when our forms are submitted. So I'm going to come over to deploys, and once again, I'm going to drag and drop my site into the upload so that we get a detected form. So if I go back to my forms, I should see that we have now one form collecting data, and it is this contact form here. So let's go ahead and try that out. Let me go to my site overview and click on the URL that Netlify has given me for free. As you can see, it takes me to the site that we just dragged and dropped in. And if we go over to the contact page, we can scroll down and actually submit our information. So I'm going to submit my name, ft@frontendtribe.com. Hi, there is my message. And I'm going to hit send message. Now, if you remember, when we were serving this site locally, submitting the form didn't do anything, but now that Netlify has stepped in, it says, thank you, your form submission has been received, and you can go back to the site. Once I've done that, if I come back into Netlify and go back to my forms, I should see that I do have a submission now, and I can see what that submission is, and of course, I can set up notifications for that. Now that we have everything set up, our site is set up to be hosted. We have a URL where we can now share this site with the world. That's right here. We can see that we can now share this, and we have this entire site deployed, ready to either drop onto a portfolio or be seen by friends and family. This has been a great project, and this is the end of this project. So thank you so much for sticking with me through this one. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video.